step one. All right. So long story short, the time to take step one is going to be different for every student on the journey, but there's a way that you can tell that is relatively straightforward. And it also gives you a high probability of success, generally anywhere from 95 to 100% pass rate if you follow this. So number one, you obviously have to go through a step one preparation period. The assessment that will tell you that you're on your right track and you know for almost 95 to 100% certainty that you're going to pass the exam is the free 120 if you score above a 70% on it. You can get the free 120 questions from the NBME website, and you can actually even, and I don't know the specifics of whether you're in the United States, whether you're in Ghana, or what your personal situation is, but you can, in the United States, schedule to take the free 120 NBME questions at a ProMetric Testing Center to simulate the real experience of how things are on test day. This is something that I advocate for all of my students to do because it helps you get rid of the nerves, the stress, the anxiety that's associated with test day. And it's super, super helpful. Another thing that you can do is if you score on 2 NBMEs consecutively above 70%, I also grant that as permission to take the step one exam, meaning that you take, let's say, NBME 30, for example. You take that, you get above 70%, then you take another NBME. You get above 70% 2 times, then I'm confident that you are in a good enough position to feel well prepared going into this exam. That's a solid question. Feel free to drop any other questions that you have below or hop into the chat and fire away. I sent you the microphone as well, Caesar. If you have any questions, then feel free to hop on. Hey, what's going on, man?
Hi, doctor. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely.
Yes, I'm from Ecuador. So I'm
Okay.
I am a surgeon, but I am trying to I'm trying to change my life. So I decided to move to the United States, and I am beginning this journey. So
Okay.
I really want to have a guide about this process to be a
Sure.
doctor there. So that I have a lot of
Excellent.
questions about that, and I am always looking for help, and I am just realized that you have a Twitter, and I am following you since several months ago.
Excellent. Well, awesome, man. What kind of questions do you have about, I don't know if you've taken your USMLE, your step
Yes,
one,
I
step two,
am
step three.
preparing now for take the step one. So I think that is a little difficult for me because there are a lot of topics and things that I see a lot of time ago. For example, biochemistry and all
Sure.
that things. So,
Okay.
what advice or what tips can you give us to remember all this stuff?
All right, man. Phenomenal question. So we'll start at the top here. Number one thing that I like all of my mentees to know is that spending an inordinate amount of time focusing on stuff like biochemistry, histology, embryology is not worth your time in the beginning of your step one preparation. The reason is because these topics are heavily memorization based, and I would rather you focus on the concepts that are easier to understand rather than to memorize. So for example, what do I mean by that? I mean that if you are preparing for step one, if you know cardiology well, the physiology, the pharmacology, the pathology, if you know these 3 things well, you are going to retain that for much, much longer than somebody that is studying, let's say, biochemistry. Biochemistry is not a topic that intuitively makes a lot of sense for many students. So you could study the entire Krebs cycle, you could study all of the glucose metabolism pathways, and you honestly could forget that 48 hours later, a week later, 2 weeks later. And so that's why that I do not recommend focusing on those topics really hardly at all until you're scoring at least into the 60%. And the reason is because if you're scoring around 60% on a mixed time block on UWorld, that means that you have such a good grasp of the other concepts that you just now have to fill in the last 10%. And so that last 10% can include the stuff like biochemistry, histology, embryology, these more memorization heavy concepts. Now, anatomy is another one of those concepts, but I'm sure as a surgeon from overseas that you have a really strong grasp on anatomy, so that should not be applicable to you. But the other three definitely can be. When you get down to the wire and you're doing really well on the systems-based learning for the other concepts, that's when I want you to turn up the dial and focus in on the biochemistry. And so how do you do that? Number one, if you have a base level of understanding, you can then use that to apply the knowledge. But how do you get the understanding beyond chemistry for my USMLE Step 1? The thing is boards and beyond is Hey, can you guys hear me? Looks like I lost connection for a second.
Now
Oh,
we can.
awesome. Sorry about that. I was just walking out of my house and I guess the Wi-Fi dropped. So the thing is I used the boards and beyond for the biochemistry. It was a gargantuan amount of time consumption of my study process. Just for context for you, I actually dove into the biochemistry and tried to learn it all my December, which was kind of like our Christmas month. The December of my second year of medical school, I spent the first week just going all in focus on biochemistry. I was already kind of meeting that 55 to 60% threshold where I was confident that I knew the other concepts decently well. And so I wanted to focus in on it at that point. The one thing I noticed is that I spent the entire week doing nothing besides biochemistry. And the score percentage after going through all the boards and beyond for the material really only went up like 7 or 8%. And so I realized at that point that I'm better off allocating my time to working on practice questions, making sure that I can apply the concepts in the questions because just having heard the material was not doing it for me personally. And a lot of students I've seen over the years have kind of been in the same boat where they're like, hey, like, I feel like I understand this concept from the video, but then they fail to be able to apply it. So I wouldn't waste necessarily an entire week straight going through and watching all the boards and beyond on biochem like a lot of students will do. What I would prefer you do is get a broad overarching understanding of the concepts. And so the way that you do that is you see the videos that are relevant to the questions that you're missing. And so the reason is with that is now you have the context of a medical scenario where this biochem could be utilized. So it serves as a memory hook for you. The biggest thing that people don't realize is if you have nothing to hook the memory onto, there's absolutely no way that you will retain that information. Absolutely no way. Because the mistake I made was I went through all this concept with no way to hook it together. I just had seen basically a slides on a PowerPoint on it. And anybody that's been through medical school remembers that even with pretty solid teachers, you have to see the material 2, 3, 4 times to really get it to stick well enough to do well on the exam. And on the USMLE, it's no different. So even though I spent a whole week doing nothing but biochem, I had only seen all of biochem one time with no memory hooks at all. The benefit of a memory hook is that it's going to shortcut the amount of times that you have to see the material because you're going to be able to make associations in between concepts. And even as good as the teaching is on boards and beyond, it doesn't really do that for you. And it also doesn't give you as many clinical scenarios that are problem based or they're action based. It's really just kind of feeds it to you like baby food, for example. It literally just hands you the information and expects you to retain it. So that's one of the difficult parts of just going through passively and watching content. I hope that helps, man.
Yes, thank you very much.
Awesome. Let me fire some other invites to speak out here. I see Jaren on here. I see M. You guys have any questions? Feel free to hop in if you do. I just sent you an invite to speak. Any other questions?
Oh, sorry. I was just talking and realized I'm on mute. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I got you, man. What's up,
Perfect.
dog?
Perfect. Yeah, great to be on. Thanks for having me. Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely,
My
man.
question, my question's in regard to UWorld questions. that you've either missed or marked, and how you kind of go about kind of deciphering which to go over. Like, there have been questions that I've marked but got right, but then there have been questions that I've missed that I didn't mark. Do you have kind of an approach to how to go about kind of reviewing those?
Yeah, man, where are you at score-wise right now? How are you scoring on your blocks?
Right now, I'm sitting at about like 68, 69% total, with this last week kind of inching over 70 a little more as I prep.
And how far out are you from your exam?
I'm 2 weeks from today. I take step on the 16th and then Comlex on the 21st.
All right, a fellow DO, let's go.
Yes,
All
sir.
right, so since you have since you have 2 weeks, man, I would focus in on the missed questions because you know for a fact that you've missed those questions. It's a point that's weak for you. You can leverage it, you can crush it, you can throw in some extra free points onto your score. The marked questions, if you didn't follow a protocol while you were marking them and it was kind of just stuff that you were iffy about, then it's harder to say how valuable they are for you right now because something that you marked 6 months ago may not be the thing that you need to be reviewing right now. So that's kind of the tricky part. One of the things I teach my students is we have like an entire video series on how to mark questions, which ones to do, which ones to review, when you need to do it, that kind of thing. But since you're 2 weeks out, it's not really something that's implementable right now. So I would stick with the missed questions, bro. What other questions you have for me, man? Looks like you're on mute.
In the meantime. Oh,
You still there? Hey, man, I heard you for a second, but it looks like you cut out. You can either hop back on or drop a comment down in the chat, and I'm happy to answer it that way. Does anybody else have any questions? I'm happy to stick around as long as y'all need.
Hey, hello everyone.
Hey, what's going on?
Hello, Dr. Austin. I'm just wondering if you could answer stuff like, I'm here with a med, like a pre-grade med, and she's just doing her practice and all of that, and on an actual hospital. And I was just wondering if you could kind of help us with some of the like medical cases that they're like that it's actually happening in there, like some questions in my that we might have about the clinical cases and all of that, or is it just for like study tactics and all of that?
This tonight is really just for strategization of the process. I just want this to be valuable for everybody listening.
Gotcha.
And without having been through the content, I don't know exactly what you even have, whether it's applicable. It'd be just too time consumptive right now. I'm
All
just out
right.
for a walk here and want to fire off help for anybody that's here to listen.
Okay, but you might be able to help us with some of the concerns of the medical situations in the hospital.
Sure, what you got, man?
Yeah. Okay. So I'm translating to her. So let me just ask her real quick, and I'll ask you. Okay.
Fire away.
All right. Thank you, doctor.
All right. While you're translating, I got another question in the chat. It says, I'm wondering if you could throw out some advice for what to do in the time before step in your rotations and shelves. Would you recommend studying for shelf during your break before rotations? Would you start studying for a shelf day one of rotations? What's the best way to prep for those exams? So for everybody listening, what the question is basically asking is, what do you do to prepare for the exams that are specific for each rotation in the hospital? And when do you start studying? So number one, I always start prepping for the shelf the very first day of the rotation. When you get home on your very first day, that's the day where you need to start looking at the resources you have and how that you want to be able to lock in and utilize them over the next 4 to 8 weeks. So that answers the first question. Number two, how do you study for this? It's going to be very variable depending on which rotation that you're on. For example, you would not study the same for family medicine as you would for surgery. Like for surgery, there's, for example, a book that is really phenomenal that's called Surgical Recall that can help you with the PIMP questions in the operating room. but also you need to be studying for the shelf itself. So you need to be doing practice questions through UWorld. And the holiday has a very solid PowerPoint that you can use as a quick review of the concepts. So it's going to be very different for every rotation. So the time in between your USMLE and starting rotations, I generally don't advise students to go super hardcore on the studying for their shelves yet. You do not need more than the time that's available in the rotation generally to prepare for the shelf exam. And so let's say that you have a week after your USMLE and then you start your rotations the week after that. I would take that time to travel, see family, relax a little bit, go to the gym, de-stress, get a massage, get some IV hydration, things like that. I would definitely utilize that to kind of recharge yourself because it's a whole new battle going into the hospital and doing your rotations. So that's a phenomenal question. All right, back to you, M. What questions did you have whenever you got done translating? In the meantime, anybody else that's got questions, feel free to drop them in the chat.
Yeah. Hey, doctor, we're trying to get the whole thing together. I'll ask you in a second, okay? And thank you for that advice, though.
Yeah, no problem, man.
Right on.
I appreciate y'all hopping on here tonight, firing some good questions.
I appreciate the space, though.
I'm going to head back for my walk soon if nobody else has any other questions.
Yeah, I'm wrapping up all this case. Give me just a minute, okay, doctor?
No problem, man.
Thank you.
I got another solid question here in the chat. It said, what resource outside of your own notes do you think is most useful when reviewing the free 120? So for me, I feel that the free 120 is kind of critical to review very, very thoroughly, even more thoroughly than you would your UWorld blocks. The reason being is because it's literally 3 blocks that are written by the exact group of people that are writing your actual exam. So I went through my first aid for every single question of the free 120, and I envisioned myself how that they could ask me the question in the same exact format of the disease they asked, as well as each one of the answer choices that were similar on the exam. So say, for example, they ask you a question on Marfan's, I would see exactly how they could ask me about other collagen deficit disorders, for example, and how that would be different. So I literally scoured my first aid and reviewed that at the same exact time as I did the free 120, because this is like as prime gold as you can possibly have when it comes down to assessing if you're ready or not to take your exam, as well as seeing where you're at on the spectrum of percentages. The NBME exams are very, very good for this. They're even more realistic than the UWorld self-assessments. The AMBOSS self-assessment is really not that accurate in terms of testing style. I remember back in the day when AMBOSS was just starting up, or they're at least starting to gain traction at this point, I should say, that they had asked me to write questions for them for their exam, for their question bank. And I remember just to hop on the call to meet with their team, I had to wake up at like 2 in the morning because they were over in Europe somewhere. At the time, I don't know, I can't speak about them personally right now, but at the time, they weren't even US based. They didn't have US doctors writing their questions. And they had asked me as a med student, I was an M4 at the time, and I just gotten my scores back. And they had asked me to help them write their questions in their bank. So that kind of told me all I needed to know about it at that point in time.
Hey, doctor, I think I have the case. It's more like a question, but tell me when you're ready, okay?
Yeah, man, sure. And if it's medical advice, just keep in mind I can't give actual medical advice, but I'm happy to try and guide you however I can.
Really appreciate. It's more like a USMLE question,
Okay.
that you'll find on a test.
Okay.
So it says, we have a male, 62 years, and he has memory issues and behavior issues. And he was working on a executive, like as an executive a bank executive, I mean. And then he had to, just leave the place because he was kind of struggling with the clients. He had like this really bad behavior. He was like just behavior issues, in general.
Sure.
More likely, like he was kind of really, really mad at people for no reason. and
Yeah.
then the family will say that his behavior was complete different before, and then he just became really irritable and just mad out of nowhere. And his conversations will be sexual and like just not prepared, like with just teenagers and all that. Will He'll be talking stuff that is not appropriate.
Okay. Go
And
ahead.
then and it says that at the same time his behavior and his memory will be worsen every time. And he actually got a degree, and his wife was like later on was controlling the finances and everything because he was struggling with that. And then he was just really unorganized and all of that because he was kind of having just these memory struggles all the time and behavior, like changing behavior on that. And then this patient was like, he was even driving on like, on the wrong way. He almost cried. And
What's the
it's
punchline, bro? What's the question?
yeah, pretty much they're giving you all the context, about the person and all the clinical stuff that they got. But then just going straight to the point, it says the qualification of the mini exam, it's mental mini exam is 20 out of 30. I don't know if that tells you something. And then it says he doesn't have any rigid muscles or anything.
Okay.
His locomotion's normal. Reflexes, deep reflexes, they're like 3+, and symmetric. Also, his muscular power or something, it's 5 out of 5, and his whole body is just okay. He has no deficit, no sensitive deficit or anything, and his cerebral function is normal. So the actual question is, what's the diagnosis? Like the more probable diagnosed, and it has multi option.
Okay.
So what are your thoughts about this guy?
Bro, that sounds like frontotemporal dementia, man. That's what I
Right.
would go. It's
I'm
so that's
really
gonna be
seeing.
somebody that's in their 40s, 50s, 60s, somewhere like that. Usually the most common symptom's gonna be behavioral disorders. They start having personality changes, start getting apathetic. And these
Got it.
patients, they're gonna usually obviously have on imaging frontal and temporal atrophy if you get an MRI. So that's what
And
I'd go with, man.
right on. Yeah, we actually have that on the multi. So thank
There
you
you
so
go.
much,
That's
doctor.
answer.
It's dementia, frontotemporal dementia. Then
Awesome.
you're
Happy to help,
good.
man.
You're really good, bro.
This is
Thank
what
you
I do,
so
bro.
much.
6
Really
years of it,
appreciate.
man.
See. Amazing. Well, really appreciate you taking the time to listen all of this stuff and actually got the correct answer. Appreciate that.
No problem, man. All right, I got another
Right.
question down here. Do you think it's a good plan to start with Amboss and then UWorld? Do you think it is better to dedicate more time to QBank than to other resources? So that's a good question, Caesar. Honestly, it's going to depend a lot on where you're at right now. I generally advocate for students to focus in on UWorld before they focus on Amboss because a lot of the stuff in Amboss is not going to be high yield for your exam. And the reason that this is important is because most people severely underestimate the amount of time that it's going to take them to complete a question bank. You got 4,000 UWorld questions. It's not something that can be done in 15 days, for example. It's going to take you weeks, if not months, to do all those. And then not even just doing them, now you have to learn from all your mistakes. So a lot of the time when I see students start off with Amboss, they make that mistake and then they don't have time to thoroughly maximize their UWorld retention. So if you're thinking about using Amboss, which I think it is a valuable question bank, the thing I would use it for is to boost up your weaknesses from your UWorld. That way that you know that you've already maxed out the UWorld and you're using Amboss as just extra repetitions. So that's a really good question, man. there's any other questions, feel free to shout them out. Otherwise, I'm going to call it a day in a little bit. All right. Awesome. Thank you guys for joining tonight. It's always a pleasure. We'll do another one of these soon.
All right, you're going to take off?
Yes, sir. Calling it a night.
Okay. Well, really appreciate your time, doctor, and hopefully we'll get to speak later on.
Absolutely. See you next time, man.
Okay. Yeah, see you next time. Have a blessed day.
You too as well.
Yeah. Thank you. See ya.
All right. I see your question in the chat, Winnie. I'm currently doing a 6-year MB CHB program in Ghana. What's the best time to take step one?